2004. For the last 15 years or so, I've been a principal at 64 Media. And what we do is provide primarily public relations support to Australian financial services brands, and that also involves some media counsel. So in today's environment, that's pretty important, and we spend a large amount of our time on that sort of activity. So the things I've been asked to discuss today are what do we promote when we're going to promote our services? What is it that we want, and where do we aim to have those services publicised or promoted? So what I always say is there's this myth around, and the myth says that good news doesn't sell. And, in today's equivalency, that would be, it doesn't result in clicks and therefore doesn't do much for your business, But I would argue that good news does sell. What you need to be doing is that demonstrating how the problems in the industry can be solved. So whenever you see negative issues and you see problems arising in the media, then what you need to do is think about solutions for those problems. So I would argue that if you're a financial advisor, I know some of you are out there and some of you are not, but if you're a financial advisor, some of the common financial problems, we need to think about them from your end client or consumer point of view. So what are the problems that are facing consumers that you potentially can help solve? Really understand what they are. So I've just listed about seven of what I think are maybe in the top 10 common financial problems out there at the moment. Of course, I'm not a financial advisor, so I don't know them all, but that's what I sort of glean from looking at what's going on in the world at the moment. These are some common problems that affect people. Now, it might be if you're a service provider to the industry, you need to think about the problems that financial advisors have and the problems that you can help solve, or the problems that licensees or other players in the financial services industry have. So think about the issues and then think of how these issues are being dealt with in the media. So, of course, what that means is you need to be across the issues, you need to be reading about them, and you need to be really aware of what those issues are and what the commentary is, so that you can go away and think about how those problems can be solved, how you can help solve the problems, but also how other people can help solve the problems. And the reason that we want to think more broadly is because when you think broadly about issues and you're offering solutions that sort of meet or help resolve those issues, you start to be thought of by the people who listen to you or see you or read about you as the problem solver. And that's ultimately really what you want to be. It's building a reputation for thought leadership and problem solution, which is, a great place to be. The next thing we're asked is where do we promote? What do we do? How do we get our messages out there? So I always argue you start where you know, then you share it, and then you start thinking bigger. So what do I mean by that? So starting where you know, I always think that your website, your newsletters, your seminars, they all already contain compliant copy because they have to, right? Of course, this is especially true if you're an authorised rep. You must have compliant material on your websites. But the other thing is, it should be true of every business. Whatever goes out on your website is public space, public domain. So, of course, that also has to be compliant. So that's where you start. You've already got the content up there on your website, in your newsletters and in your seminars. So why not make that content work for you and use that kind of content to inform the new material that you want to create? Now, one of the first pieces of copy that people like to create are blogs. And I'm just going to assume that we need just a quick refresh on what a blog is. So a blog is really just an opinion piece. It's your opinion. But, of course, they also need to be around the issues that you think are relevant to you and your clients and your potential customers. And they need to be issues that you can see solutions to. But even though they are based on opinions and your own opinions, they also need to tick that compliance box. And then if I can just say one thing, these days the shorter the better. So blogs typically are around 600 words, but a little bit shorter is okay because, we are living in an era of clickbait. People want to just get onto something, read about it, and get off again, or go on to the next thing. So it's better to have those sorts of blogs a little bit too short than a little bit too long. You'll lose people. We actually have some tips up on our website on how to create blogs if you're stuck, and we'll go through a little bit of that in a minute. Now, sharing, of course, we all know what we mean when we say sharing these days, but one of the points I'd like to make is make sure that you host the blogs on your website. Now, if what you've experienced after your blog's been on your website, and your visitors to your website have had an opportunity to read it and they enjoy what you say, and you've had some positive sort of interactions, that's the time to share it. Sort of don't go out there and share it before you're aware of how well or otherwise it's done. So when you're ready and when you think that's okay, start sharing them more broadly on social media. If you haven't got your social media accounts yet, it's probably time to start. You may have a Facebook page of your own, a Facebook account of your own. It's time to create your own Facebook business account. The other, or maybe even before Facebook, is a LinkedIn company page. So I'm assuming a lot of you would already have a LinkedIn personal page, and I personally love my LinkedIn personal page. That's how people get to know you and what you're interested in and so forth. But it can't hurt to also have the company page, and it also might help to sort of differentiate between what you are talking about professionally yourself and what your business represents and stands for. So LinkedIn company page, your own Facebook company page. And then when you're brave enough, it's time to start thinking about Twitter. But Twitter is an interesting beast. I always think Twitter is like headlines on steroids. So you need to create Twitter posts that are really engaging and get people to look and see and start to look for your tweets. And so it's a little trickier. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter when you're brave enough and you think you've got across it. And then later, if you're quite clever with the camera, start thinking about Instagram. Instagram is growing very quickly in popularity. I personally think it's not as efficient for businesses as it is for sort of personal brands, but it's a matter of choice. And I think perhaps if you're younger and you're across that medium, it's a great opportunity to build your brand. Now, the easiest way to start sharing is to just put out Facebook and LinkedIn posts that's linked straight back to your website. So the reason that we want to keep people going back to the website is that's where all your collateral's really stored, and that's where you're going to make the best connections with your current customers, your potential customers, your potential clients. So we want everyone coming back to the website to see what other services and help you can give them. So the website's acting that way as sort of a bit of an advertising portal in a way. You host all your material there. That's where people will get the opportunity to see more about who you are and what you do. Now, once you've sort of got across that, sharing, you might try Hootsuite. So Hootsuite, there are lots of platforms out there, and they help with the programming of tweets and Facebook posts and so on. So if you feel like you're really getting across the social media stuff, then think about a platform like Hootsuite. And for those of you who don't know, Hootsuite allows you to program tweets across social media posts across multiple accounts at the same time. There's a free function on it, and there's also a paid function on it, and you can actually not only get across all of those platforms at once, but you can also program it ahead of time. So if you have a seminar coming up, for example, and it's in, at the end of the month, you can program some social media once a week, or however often you feel is appropriate. So I love it. I use it quite a bit. Now that you are part of social media groups, it's time to contribute to conversations. So the easiest way to do that, of course, is to go to the conversations and groups that are happening on the social media platform. So LinkedIn, for example, has a lot of groups. You might belong to, say, Australian financial planning group, and you have a conversation there with largely probably your peers about financial planning issues. Now, yes, this is in a way the industry talking to itself. It's not the industry talking to, clients or consumers. However, it gives you that practice you need to be able to air your views and practice airing your views and see what resonates with people and see what kind of opinions are out there. So after you've joined, you've created your social media accounts for your business, join some of those groups, and just for a start, you can just sit there and have a listen to other people's conversations. But then as you get bolder or you get more informed and you have more of an opinion about the matters being discussed, it's time to contribute. Then once you've done that, the next step is to create your own groups. So we have a number of groups. We're not active in them all the time, but when you have your own group, for example, on LinkedIn, that offers you the opportunity to direct email people from time to time. I think it's about once a week. So that's really powerful because you then have access to that database of people that you might not have just as a one-on-one or as a group of contacts that you might have built up. So, creating your own groups is great because you're in control of the conversation or the topics that are going to be discussed, but you're also in charge of, sending messages via direct email to them. So that's something we've used in the past, and we quite like that. Now, I often get asked, how good is how good or how important or how successful is social media? So I thought we'd just include a few stats from the 2018 Yellow Social Media Report. So if you're not familiar with it, it's put out by Census. So Census was Yellow Pages, became Census, and is now calling the report the Yellow Report. So I thought this is really interesting. For a start, 8 in 10 Australians use social media. I actually thought it might be a little higher than that, to be honest. Everyone I know uses social media, but 8 in 10, it's still a large proportion of Australians. And then Facebook is still the most popular by far. It's 94% of people who use social media use Facebook, so that's just amazing. The fastest growing is Snapchat. However, have a look also at Insta. So Instagram is also growing very fast. I don't know that Snapchat's, I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't know that Snapchat's all that useful for brand building. But I think Insta does have a little bit of a place. You've certainly seen personal brands really escalate via Instagram, so that's interesting. But then some of this is a survey of 800 consumers, also 1,000 small to medium businesses, and about 100 large businesses. So quite a good study. And what we found was that almost half of small businesses, almost half of medium businesses, and 60% of large businesses use social media. So again, I would have thought those numbers were a little bit higher, but that's still more than half or around half of businesses using social media. And 9 in 10 of those businesses use Facebook. So it also depends, of course, who you're talking to. So if you're an advisor, you want to be talking to consumers. And if you're a service provider to the financial services industry, then, of course, you'll want to be talking to the professionals within the industry. So it might not be as appropriate. Facebook might not be as appropriate. It might be more of a LinkedIn kind of conversation. Now, the next bit I thought was really interesting. So consumers, 24% use social media to follow brands. So that's not that high, in my opinion. But 41% of people aged 31 to 39 use it, which is interesting. So people in a younger demographic are more likely to follow brands via social media. So I thought that was quite interesting. And 64% are more likely to trust a brand if it interacts positively on social media. So I think those stats are quite interesting. And you can have a look at yourself. There's the link down the bottom of the page there, so you can go in there and have a look at those statistics a little more closely if you like. But yeah, Insta's grown from 31% to 46%. So that's quite rapid growth as well. And then, of course, the next step is really to think bigger. And what I mean by think bigger is you've got to go outside your comfort zone a little bit and start promoting your business via the media. You don't have to, of course, but if you want to, really expand who you're talking to and where you're messaging, who gets to know you and your brand, who you're reaching, stepping it up, I guess, ramping it up. If you want to go bigger and broader than your own website and your own social media presence, then media is a great opportunity for you. And now, look, we do a lot of media training, and we've trained people all over, from the very smallest provider to the largest, from small advisors and advice businesses to licensee groups. And there is a fear factor, and I understand that. There's a fear factor doing a webinar. There is a fear factor involved, and I think some of the concerns that people have, brought to us, are really around, I might mess it up. I might not say, I might not be understood. I might be taken out of context. That's a big issue we come up against from time to time. People are afraid of that. People are afraid of being quoted, on something that's not relevant, or saying the wrong thing. Just saying the wrong thing. You're under pressure and you talk to a journalist, you just say the wrong thing and you can't believe it. Sitting in the car on the way back to the office, you're going, I can't believe I said that. But look, my tip here is, the opportunity is just so big. The opportunity that media presents to you is just so big. Don't let fear stop you from doing it. Just don't let fear get in the way, because largely speaking, journalists, especially if journalists are human too, so especially if you explain to them, this is the first media interview I've done, or I haven't done many media interviews, there is a common human factor there. There is they will take that into account, and they will realise that you need a little bit of help, or they'll take a little more time, or they just need to relax you a little bit so that you can come across the way that you want to come across. But all that said, there's just nothing better than preparation. So before you begin talking to the media, do the other things that I talked about, and write your blogs, share them on your social media accounts, practice having opinions in groups and online and in discussions with your family and friends. So do some research first, then start this testing your opinions on family and friends and colleagues and clients. So I'm quite opinionated, so I have a lot of opinions around dinner parties and test my opinions out, and it's very interesting. If you can just start doing that kind of thing without, boring people too much, but if you can pick an issue that's really close to your heart, and then say, well, when we go to the barbecue this weekend, I might ask some of my friends or talk to some of my friends about that issue. And, here's an opinion that's a little outside the square, but I'd be keen to hear what my friends and family have to say about that. So test your opinions so that the kinds of words, the kinds of statements, the kinds of emotions that you're going to invoke when you start talking. It is easy to be misunderstood, so practice is really the key. So that's the warning, but it's still a really great opportunity, so don't miss it. And now, again, this is the same concept that I talked about starting where you know, and then getting a little braver and a little braver and a little braver, just so that building on your own confidence to talk to the media. And so what I mean there is start with some media you already know. So I wouldn't suggest you go off, even though you probably read the Financial Review every day, I wouldn't suggest you start there, because, they talk to a wide range of people, and, it's quite sophisticated financial news. Start somewhere else that you're maybe more familiar with. Look, one of the a person I spoke to some time ago now was an advisor, and he was well aware of the possibilities that the media offered to him, and the ability that it gave him to connect better with his potential clients. So what he did was, well, he was a fan of I think he was a sailor. So he was really familiar with a sailing magazine, and he thought, well, what I'll do is prepare something for sailors, some financial tips for sailors. So one of his clients wanted to take a year off and sail around the world and so forth. So he thought, well, what I'll do is put together an article that addresses the things that, generically speaking, of course, not specific, but generically speaking, the things that people need to think about if they're planning to go off travelling for a year, or the things that people need to think about if they're having a baby, or the things that people need to think about before putting people into aged care. So what he did was he started with a conversation or a tips sort of piece on what to do if you're thinking of sailing around the world. And he pitched that to a sailing magazine, and it was published. So it was using something that he was very, very familiar with, a piece of media that he was very familiar with and comfortable with, and he understood the audience really well. You know, he knew that the people reading that magazine were going to be people with a love of sailing. He'd met lots of sailors. He was a sailor himself. So he was very, very familiar with that medium before he went anywhere near it. Just a little backtrack on that, though. Don't start putting pen to paper or tapping on the keyboard until you've pitched your idea to an editor, because what you think might make great news, you know, sometimes doesn't when you go and talk to an editor. And there's no point in wasting time here. You can't afford spending time writing 400 to 600 words on a topic that may, you know, not really resonate with that with the editor. So approach the editors first. And in this day and age, you know, you don't even have to pick up the phone. When I was much younger, I used to be afraid of picking up the phone, but I didn't have any choice. So I had to pick up the phone and make calls. And of course, you learn to do it. But these days, you don't even have to do that. An email is fine. And in fact, when you're approaching the media, emailing is probably preferred, because then an editor or a journalist can get to those emails in their own time. And, you know, remember, they're always on deadline. So if you ring, you might interrupt a deadline or whatever. So, yeah. Pitch the idea to an editor, but email is probably a good way to go about it. So to get a real understanding, be sort of like that guy and follow the stories that the media are covering, the media of your choice are covering. So, you know, choose something, follow it, see what kinds of stories are being told and what types of stories are being written, or, you know, it could be you might prefer to go on TV or radio, what's being broadcast, and think about opinions on the current stories that might be, you know, of interest to people, A, reading the publication or watching the program, and B, the journalist. And of course, then the next step is to just broaden that out to other media, just in the sort of the same way you kind of grew your you know, creating your content and sharing it. Now broaden it out to other media. As soon as you start to get you know, a bit of a level of comfort dealing with an editor or a journalist, start to think about where you might broaden your exposure. So think about it could be similar publications, similar programs, or similar online places, or it could be something quite different, you know, something a bit more general, a bit broader. And then before you go to the extent of maybe contacting the media, start making some comments on the stories that are currently being told, but be informed. You know, informed commentary is great. Keyboard warriors are, you know, we already have far too many of them. So, you know, I would just say, you know, aim to be considered and informed and make positive contributions to conversations, rather than sort of going out there and smacking everything and all other opinions around, smacking them around. Yeah. Okay, so then you know, I'm aware that, like all businesses, no matter what business you're in, you're always pressed for time, right? So this is a really big one. And there's so many things, particularly in our industry, that consume our time. You do have to have time, but as I said before, some of those things are already there for you. So it's a matter of, you know, making more of them and making them work harder, if you like. But I think probably the most important thing is to allocate some specific time to your marketing or to your comms, just so that this is the dedicated time I'm going to promote. I'm going to commit to drawing up my marketing or communications plan, and really do it. You know, prepare the plan and schedule the activities. You know, I think I remember this person that I met. What he did was, during January was a very slow period for him, and I think January in Australia is a bit slow in terms of business. We're all at the beach, and okay, not all of us, but speaking for myself, we're at the beach. You know, it's a little quieter. So what this person did was allocate a block of time. I think it was a week, might have been 2 weeks, and he decided he was going to do his whole plan for the year in that period, and he worked pretty solidly just on that. So what he did was he drew up a list of issues that he thought he could talk to. and then he wrote articles around it or blogs around it, and he made those each of those blogs he made serve a multiple of different purposes. So he had a website version, he had a version for his newsletter, he created social media pieces around it. He put together potential questions and answers that journalists might ask him, or might want to cover in an interview. And he really, really worked those pieces. He made pieces work more than once, so that he's not writing a whole, War and Peace about it. He wrote particular issues, he did particular formats, but at the end of that 2-week period, he had more or less enough material for a book, which would be great. I mean, a book is another great marketing tool. Then when you have all of that, you can pre-program it. You can say, well, I'm going to be talking about issue A in week 1, and I'm going to be talking about issue B in week 2, etc. You can program it if you have that. And of course, there might be other topics that come up and other issues that you can talk to, and content plans should be quite flexible, but you have the bare bones of it, which is really, really important. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit and just talk about how to create content, because what I have found with a lot of people is they want to write, or they want to participate in interviews, or they want to, do social media tweets and shares and likes and all that kind of stuff, but they don't know how to write or how to put content together. So this again comes back to the issues that you've chosen. It comes back to those solutions that you've thought about in relation to those issues. Now, the simplest way to do this is to go about this is just jot down the 3 main points. Remember, you're only talking 600 words as a maximum. So just jot down the 3 main points that you want to make about the issue, the solution to the issue. And that's only going to be 200 words each, right? So just the 3 main points. Then start thinking about how you would explain that in words. So I don't suggest going then to the keyboard and sort of typing in your thoughts unless that really works for you. But most people are better at explaining things verbally than they are getting it down on a keyboard. So practice explaining that and do it in only 5 minutes. And the timing's important, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then look at the tools that you might have available to you to help you create that. So once you've got the dialogue around your issue, use some of these tools. So let's just go through them. First of all, your laptop, your iPad, your iPhone, or if you're Android, whatever they are, I use all Mac products. Your phone and your iPad are going to be your great friends. They've got apps that are, millions of apps. So I'm just talking about a few things that I use. The iTalk is the recording function or app on your iPhone. There's a similar one for Android. Rev is a service whereby tapes are transcribed. And look, it's really, really cheap. So it's $1 a minute. So that's why your 5 minutes, not only, we speak about 150 words a minute. So 5 minutes is going to give you enough material. It's going to give you more than 600 words. And it's only going to cost you $5 with Rev to get it transcribed. So it's really efficient use. You've got these tools right at your fingertips, and they're very efficient. It's a very efficient use of your time. You're only taking 5 minutes to talk about it. Of course, you take longer to think about it, but that's different. You've got a recording of only 5 minutes. You've got a recording that goes to Rev. It's going to be done quickly. Smaller tapes or recordings are done very, very quickly by Rev. And then you've got all your words coming back to you. You haven't even really had to touch your keyboard at all yet. So you've got the bare bones of that material straight away. Then another useful thing, I'm not sure, I've only discovered this myself quite recently, as in this year. There is a function on modern Macs, and I believe there's a similar function on some PCs, that does a talk to text. So you can talk into the microphone of your computer and it gets transcribed on your screen as you're watching, which is just amazing. Of course, like a lot of those talk to text programs, it's not perfect, but you know what? It's a great start, and you don't have to type, And, you know, you'll have to check it out, of course, but you'll have to check your transcript anyway. And it's instant. There's no waiting for it to be done. So, you know, give it a whirl. I've given it a whirl. I think it's okay, you know, and but it's right. It's instant. Now, Canva, we've talked a lot about creating stories and creating blogs and creating articles, and that's all about copy. Things like Canva become important when you want to put out things like infographics, or you want to prepare an advertisement, or you want to do a presentation. So Canva is a sort of desktop publishing tool for people who are not desktop graphic designers. So it's really handy. It's got loads and loads of templates in it, and it allows you to create your own visuals, if you like, which, you know, if you're going to be an Insta brand person, you might really enjoy Canva. Okay, so that's all about how you create content. And, you know, look, once you get your transcript and it comes back to you and it's full of all your thoughts, sort of stream of consciousness thoughts, there is going to be some work to be done, but that is going to be an edit job rather than a, you know, starting from the first word and putting it all together. So the next really great thing, of course, you can do to help build your position as a solver of issues and start positioning yourself as a thought leader, is to curate content. So what we mean by that is finding content that's really relevant to your target market and sharing it. So what I see a lot of is people finding, and I mean, we're all guilty of this because you know, we're all very, very busy. So we're all guilty of this. We see something fabulous come up on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, and we go, yeah, I agree, and just share it. And sometimes we're so busy we don't even make a comment. We just share or whatever. And look, what's really the point of that? There's not much point to that, because chances are, if this piece of shared content's already resonated with you, other people would have seen it and other people would have shared it. So there's really not a lot of point. But if you put your own take on it, there is a lot of point. So if some interesting piece of content comes up, you see it come up on your feed, at the very least, make a comment on it. Make some sort of interesting comment on it. Put your own take on it. Now, if you have a little more, but you know, that's in the interest of speediness, you can do that quite quickly. The other way to go about this, and if you have a little more time, is to find really unusual sources of information from places that are much less mainstream. So this could arise more out of what your interests are outside work, for example. So you might hear or see something very interesting in another field, maybe in sport. Maybe you come across something in sport, or maybe in local government, or whatever it is, and you go, that's really interesting, and I think that approach could work in financial services. And I think, you know, develop your thinking a little bit around that, and then share that kind of information. It's something that's, you know, something that's not already hugely out there, but can be sort of leveraged, if you like, to help build your reputation as someone who thinks outside the square, someone who has a really interesting approach to problem solving and finding solutions for people. The other thing is to think like a journalist and start subscribing to media releases. So, you know, there are places where you can get media releases en masse, but it might be more relevant for you to, you know, find media releases that are attached to your spheres of interest again. So, you know, again, if you do something with your local council, or if you do something with your children's activities or whatever, and they have media releases relating to what activities have gone on for that particular group, subscribe to those and see. This is all about lateral thinking. See if they've come up with great initiatives or ideas that could be, you know, used to think bigger in the financial services space. And just a little word on etiquette is you always link to the original source. You know, someone else has actually had this idea. It's not your original ideas, but yeah, if you just put your take on it and then link it back to the original source, then, you know, you're doing the right thing. Okay, I wanted to talk about the value of earned media. So this is what we call earned media, is what we call the material that gets published in the press. So if you have an interview with a journalist and it results in an article where you're quoted, that's earned media. You know what the others are, owned and shared. It is really, so that's where you create your own, and it's shared in your own area, so your website and your social media accounts. Paid is obviously advertising and things like that, and earned is what we traditionally thought of as PR, and that's about getting quoted or having your own pieces quoted. Now, the reason that we call it earned media is because you've had to actually pass a credibility test to get published or to get broadcast or to be interviewed in the first place. You have to pass that credibility test with a journalist or an editor. So if you are quoted, or if your piece is published, or if you are interviewed, you've passed that credibility factor. So the value of that piece is really strong. You know, people say, well, you know, he's been quoted in the media, so, you know, he's or she, of course. So they've been quoted in the media, and so they've passed the credibility test. So I will, you know, dedicate some time to reading this article, or to listening to what this person has to say. What I'm sort of getting at is, it makes you and your business more credible if you have been quoted in the press. It's also probably, I'm biased, but I would say it's one of the best ways to extend your reach. The fact that you are published or broadcast means that, you know, you're not limiting your audience to just the people you already know. When you are in the media, your opinions, your thoughts, your ideas, your solutions, they're going to be read or looked at by people who are not already in your contacts list, people who are not your clients, people who are not your customers, and even people who are not your followers, you know, and not your friends on Facebook. But it's going to really explode your audience, if you like. It goes, I mean, staying in the office, it goes much further than you could go just by yourself. So that's another reason why it's so powerful. And then, of course, don't forget that once that piece is published or broadcast, you can share that link on your website. You can't usually share the whole article because there's copyright issues. Check, you know, they might be quite happy. Check with the journalist or editor to see if they're happy for you to do that. But usually what you can do is share the link so that it goes back to the original publication where you were quoted, but, you know, you are able to put that link on your website. So the value of it is, you know, can't be understated. So a top tip really boils down to have something really, really interesting to say and be really reliable. So the interesting thing to say is something that's outside the square, you know, something that people haven't already been saying. So this is where, again, it comes back to thinking about the issues that really resonate with your communities, and having a really interesting point of view, testing them with people you know, and then putting them forward to the media. And the thing about reliability, when I was a journalist, the most astounding things used to happen. You know, sometimes you would set up an interview and you'd be all good to go, and then the person would say, oh, you know, I can't do it, or can we do this tomorrow, or it's not going to happen. Usually that meant they'd got cold feet. So a few things happened around that. So the things that happened around that is, for me as a journalist, that really ticked me off, because I'd had to make room in my diary to do the interview, and now I didn't have an interview. Then the next thing it told me was that this person didn't have the courage of their convictions. They weren't brave enough to put forward their point of view. They had thought about it and they didn't want to do it. So my chances of coming back to that person at a later stage were pretty much nil, because my story had gone to hell in a handbag, and and I just didn't rely. I knew I couldn't rely on that person to help me, you know, or to honour their commitments. So it is okay to say no to an interview, but don't say no to an interview, you know, with only half an hour's notice or whatever. It's okay to say no. You don't have to do every interview. You don't have to have, you know, you don't have to, but just make sure that there's plenty of warning. Now I want to get to the, I guess, the curly bit of the conversation. We have had really negative sentiment around our industry, and I don't need to tell you that. The trust has been broken, And it's been broken at lots of levels, so the government, with the regulators, with the consumers. So there's a lot of negativity around, and trust takes time to rebuild, and it can be a really long, hard, slow process. And I know you know this. In my opinion, change needs to happen at every level, but it does need to be led from the top. I can't even say that more strongly. It has to come from the top. And it needs to change at every level, but it has to come from the top. How are we going to do that? That'll be interesting. We'll watch the space. The problem, or it's a problem for our industry, but it's actually a great thing, is that consumers are now more powerful than they've ever been before. And they will, and they have no compunction about it, call the industry to account, especially via social media. So that's a really powerful thing for us as consumers, and I think it's a good thing. But the problem for our industry is you cannot get it wrong anymore. We cannot get it wrong anymore. We have to be doing the right thing. If we do the wrong thing, we will be called to account, and we'll have to make, we'll have to repair that damage. Now, what happens in a media sense? So we all know what's happened in the big broad sense, but in a media sense, what's happened is there's been a crisis around things that are said and the things that are done, and they've been two different things. And this has been applying. We've seen it happen to brands of every size across the industry. So what's said and done are two different things, and that's really, really not okay. We need to, in order to rebuild trust, we have to do the things we say we're going to do. So I think the solution is to become a consumer champion. Consumers, or if you're not seeing consumers face to face, become your client or customers champion. It's their issues you're there to solve. It's about them, it's not about us. So if you're a provider, what you need to do is, start thinking about what matters to my clients, what matters to my customers. And then you have to be true to who you are. So you have to say who you are and who you represent. And this is the part that's going to take, I think, a little bit of time, if you haven't done this already, is to define your own values. I mean, I think we all instinctively know what our own values are, but maybe some of us haven't sort of sat down and thought about it and articulated them very well. And then once you've done that, you have to live and breathe them. Absolutely have to live and breathe them. And the final sentence here is what I've come to believe to be true over probably this year, which has been a particularly troublesome year. I mean, the whole 15 years I've been in PR, I think, has been interesting for financial services, but the last 12 months has been probably the most difficult. If you're currently aligned to a brand with values that don't match yours, you have to leave it. You have to leave it as soon as you can. And I understand that's really difficult for some people because they have commitments and they need jobs and all that kind of stuff. But seriously, that's going to mean the biggest difference. I think that will create the biggest difference in our industry. But just some really top tips, because that was quite heavy. Some really top tips is if you are in a media interview or you're facing a client or customer who comes across with very negative comments about the industry or about what we do in the industry, my suggestions are, look, acknowledge the issues they raise. They're raising them for a reason. It's usually not just to kick people, right? But don't take any unnecessary blame. And I think the thing is that we feel bad about things that have happened in our industry, and rightly so, but don't take unnecessary blame. There are the loss of trust is industry-wide, and it needs an industry-wide response. It's not all your fault. So, don't accept wholesale carte blanche blame for everything. So the tip to that is to empathise with people who've been wronged or who feel the way they do, and make conversations, again, all about them. This is all about them and getting solutions that are for them, pointing back to all those issues that concern them. And then, as I said, become the consumer advocate. Be on their team. Everything that you do, demonstrate how this comes back to, I care about finding a solution that makes this issue less problematic for you. And finally, I think the most important thing in the face of all our negativity, it's a $64 million question. It really is, how do we regain trust? But really, I think it is really about being true to your values. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Julie. So we'll now open it up to questions. And so one of them is, so how would you communicate your values to your clients and prospects?
So I think the articulation of values does come back to what is written into what's on your website, and pins everything that you say. There's always an opportunity whenever you're preparing any piece of content. You don't need to come out and say, I believe. You don't need to be as blatant as saying, I believe in X, Y, and Z, but you do have to inform the flavour of your written material with your values. I believe that everybody should have a good retirement, a good standard of living in retirement, and I'm doing these things to make sure that they do. So it's saying, I care about you as my customer or my client. And I understand that that's an issue, and I'm focused on that issue for you. So it becomes easier with practice about finding how to say stuff, how to express your values that are not our values are. Because, and I think there is a place for putting your values up actually as a separate thing on your website. These are our values or our ethics or our mission. It's all inspires mission statements and so forth. But it's deeper than that, I think. It has to resonate throughout all your comms.
Great, thanks, Julie.
It's okay.
And another one, so if someone does get a media opportunity and they don't want to answer something the journalist has asked, how does one handle that?
Okay, so I think what you're saying is the no comment response, right? So, you might be asked some pretty tricky questions when you're in a media interview, and again, you don't need to answer questions that aren't really that the industry has to respond to, rather than you as a financial services provider or advisor. But my advice is, don't ever say no comment, because it just sounds dodgy, right? It just sounds like you've got something to hide, that you don't want to answer the question, that you're not transparent. And again, that's not, that's usually not your values. You usually are trying to be very transparent and upfront and honest. So rather than use the word no comment, which invokes that kind of negative feeling, to say, look, that's not something that I'm across, or that's not something I've thought about. That's not something that I'm ready to share my opinion on. I'll have to give that some thought. There are ways, and it's just like when you ask tricky personal questions by your mum, right? And you go, well, Mum, not sharing today. But you do it in a polite and considerate kind of way that doesn't make you look a little bit sus. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And finally, and this is a question from me, is off the record really off the record in an interview?
I get asked that a lot. In fact, I'd like a doll off every time I get asked that. Look, journalists have to abide by code of ethics as well. And off the record, in my experience, has always been respected. Off the record means off the record. What it means is the journalist will not quote you, Leah, as saying what you just said, right? But my advice is, because of course the journalist's job is to get a story, right? That's their job. So why are you telling them stuff you don't really want them to know? So my advice is they will use that information to inform them about, things in the wider community or the wider world of financial services. But if you really don't want to be found out, or somehow that gets out that you shared that opinion or whatever, why say it in the first place? If you don't want it out there, don't say it. So look, some people, that's my advice. If you've got something off the record that you don't want the media to know, don't say it. Sorry, Mum, not sharing that information, right? But if actually the thing with off the record usually is that you do want them to know, but you don't want to be attributed to that comment. So my advice is just be very careful, because it may be that only Leah knows that information. So even though the journalist hasn't told anyone, it's pretty clear where the information came from. So my number one warning is don't say it if you don't want it known. But number two, if you really do want it known, think carefully before you say it, because it might be that you're the only person that would have known that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for everyone who's also joined us today. We hope you can join us for next month's webinar. Thanks again, Julie.
Thank you. Bye.